is going on, y'all? Faiz Sports Talk back at it with another video. And again, I've got a very special guest today with me. We have Erik Lambert from Sports Mockery. How's it going, Erik?
It's going well, man. How are you?
Good. I've been wanting to collaborate with you for a long time. Erik, if you guys don't know, is one of the best follows for Bears coverage. He covers the team like a blanket, man. And I'm telling you right now, he is very objective. So if you're looking for, objective, real analysis that isn't just, always covering the Bears and in a positive light, but actually giving you the real, Erik's the guy for you. So I'll go ahead and make sure to link his, social media info and where you can find his work. But Erik, I got a bunch of questions here for you, so I hope you're ready.
I'm ready.
All right, I'm not holding back. So let's go ahead and get started here. The season just ended. All right, it just ended. I know we haven't even had a chance to kind of dissect what just happened. Like, oh my God, there were so many ups and downs. But if you had to put a bow on it, if you had to say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, from what the expectation was going into this past season, if 10 is a resounding success, which I'm sure that's not going to be your answer, but if 1 is an abject failure, what would you give this Bears season in terms of that scale?
Given the expectations and all things being, weighed in, what they had to deal with the pandemic and having to navigate through it, the 6-game losing streak after starting 5-1, so many ebbs and flows to this season. It's been kind of crazy, to be perfectly honest with you.
Great.
But at the end of the day, you always have to look at the final result. They were 8-8. They did make the playoffs. Got blown out against the Saints. I'd give it about a 6 right now. Sort of right back where they were last year, but managing to squeeze out a playoff berth, second in 3 years. It is an accomplishment. Certainly not the one they were looking for. But at the end of the day, they didn't get the job done they were hoping to. And, they're kind of right back where they started last year.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's fair because, like I said, they made the playoffs, and you've mentioned this, on a technicality. Let's be honest. If the NFL didn't expand the playoffs, we'd be home a week earlier. So I'm sure that's what Matt Nagy probably said to management, that I made the playoffs again, but he has, obviously the NFL to thank for that. So that's fair. So here's the other thing. The biggest news that's come so far the offseason has been about the Bears retaining Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace. So Bears fans are up in arms. I got a bunch of my subs in the comments with pitchforks talking about why did we bring these guys back? So give me your perspective of why you believe Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace were brought back. And also, in that same light, I haven't heard anything about an extension. So if it is just for this next season, what do they need to do, if anything, to keep their jobs?
Well, I think there are a few factors in play here. The big one as to why they were brought back, to me, is George McCaskey doesn't really trust himself in the current climate of where things are to find the right guys, because he screwed this up before when he fired 2 guys who were relatively proven. Remember, he went away from Jerry Angelo in his first season as team chairman to Phil Emery. That was a disaster because Emery ends up firing Lovie Smith, who was a proven coach, goes to Mark Trestman, everything goes to hell. So he's got that in the back of his mind. And then there's all these other teams that are way ahead of him in the GM and head coaching searches. So he immediately feels like he's going to be behind the 8 ball and be behind in terms of trying to find the right guys. And he fears that all the good candidates are probably going to be scooped up before he gets enough into the process. I think that's a big play in here. But also, he looks around the league and all these other teams are constantly firing head coaches, firing GMs, and a lot of them are teams that continue to do this and just can't seem to keep finding success.
Right.
So he's got also that in his head. Maybe continuity is for the best. You look at the Steelers, they've had Mike Tomlin forever. They've had Kevin Colbert forever. Granted, they've also had a quarterback forever. So, that's something you need to keep in mind as well. But he's hoping that maybe a full off season without COVID and all that, maybe they get it. Maybe they get the quarterback position right. This team is closer to the top than it is the bottom. He's got that in his head. So maybe if I just give these guys one more year, they've got leadership qualities. I'm not going to take that away from them. They do have leadership qualities. but maybe they're young, they're learning. Maybe they can finally, find the right formula to get it over the top. Not going to be easy given the resources they have, but I imagine that's what went into this decision.
So what's the minimum bar that George McCaskey has set for them for next season? You have to at least do this or you're out.
To me, double-digit wins, at least 10, or since it's a 17-game season, yeah, I guess 10 would be fine, but that's one. But also, not just making the playoffs, I think they need to win in the playoffs, at least one playoff victory in order to show that the team is making the progress that they're expected to make. If they don't do that, I don't expect them to be back after next season.
I totally agree, because what's the improvement then? Because you made the playoffs this year, you got to at least win a playoff game. So totally an agreement there. And you brought up a great point about continuity. I know people don't want to hear this, but other candidates won't come to Chicago if they know that, hey, if I don't win the Super Bowl every year, my job's on the line. Like, there's got to be some sort of stability here. We got rid of Tressman, we got rid of John Fox. Like, after 2-3 years, you want to have some sort of stability there. Not to defend Nagy and Pace, just defending the fact that you need to have a culture. Okay, so that's fair too. Let's switch gears to the quarterback situation and specifically talk about Mitchell Trubisky. So we know Mitchell Trubisky is a very polarizing figure in Chicago. There are his supporters, his truthers, and then there's people that, quite frankly, don't think he can play quarterback. A two-part question. One, does Mitchell Trubisky return to the Bears in any scenario, whether that be as a backup, coming back as a starter, whatever the case may be? Do you feel like he returns? And if he doesn't, just walk me through Mitchell Trubisky's career in terms of why it never worked for him, why it never clicked. And how much blame do you put on Mitch, and how much blame do you put on Matt Nagy for not making it work?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think the only scenario where Mitch Trubisky returns to Chicago would be as a starter. And I don't think Matt Nagy wants to do that. I think he wanted to move on from Mitch initially when he benched him for Nick Foles. Foles played bad, then got hurt, so they had to go back to Mitch. Mitch did fine down the stretch, did enough to get him into the playoffs, but he really wasn't that much different from where he was before. He was just playing really bad defenses.
Right.
So he played well enough, but then he goes against the Packers, he goes against the Saints, doesn't play well in either game. So you pretty much saw the quarterback you've been seeing for the past 2 years. So I don't think the Bears are going to end up bringing him back unless he wants to come in as a third string, which obviously isn't going to happen. So, unless it's an absolute doomsday scenario, he's not coming back to the Bears, in my opinion.
Fair.
Now, as to his career in general, I think the blame actually, part of it is Mitch. He just doesn't see the game the way the upper tier of quarterbacks do. He's an athlete. Yeah. He can throw the ball well. When he's able to do all of that as sort of backyard style, his improvisational skill is actually pretty good. And he can be like that. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to stand in the pocket and survey the field at some point and find the open man. And he's consistently inconsistent at this. He doesn't see the field too well. He misses a lot of open men. He overthrows a lot of guys. We've seen this for years now. And at some point, you got to accept that maybe this is who he is. Maybe there is another offense out there that can sort of mask those problems. You think of Kyle Shanahan, you think of Sean McVay, guys like that. But at the end of the day, he has a ceiling, and his ceiling is okay, but not good enough. Replaceable, I think, is what is the word that they usually use for guys like that. So in terms of his own blame, you got to put at least 50% on it. I would put it closer to 60 because at the end of the day, you got to be able to play regardless of your surroundings. You look at Deshaun Watson. He's an absolute miserable situation.
I love that example. Thank you. Keep going.
Yeah, 4,800 yards, 33 touchdown passes, and he's thrown to basically scrubs with, a replacement head coach. Yep. Stars find a way to be productive regardless of their surroundings. That's the key here. And Mitch, he was fine, but he wasn't anywhere close to that level. Yep. So my problem with the whole thing is Nagy's not a great offensive coach. He's already proven that. His game planning is awkward. His personnel usage is very baffling to me. He can design some really nice plays, and he's gotten guys open a lot, but you need way more than that to be an effective play caller in the NFL. But my actual problem is the Nagy hire itself. because if you look at that system that Andy Reid runs in Kansas City and then you look at the way Mitch plays, it was a bad fit. It was a bad fit from the start. He should have been looking at, Matt LaFleur like they did with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. That system would have been perfect for Mitch.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, I was one of the people who said they should have fired John Fox in 2017 because I knew they were going to take a quarterback, and I knew he never had a history of developing one throughout his entire career.
Right.
So I felt it was probably best if they had started fresh. And what really hurts is Kyle Shanahan was the one who ended up getting hired in that cycle. So he would have been perfect for Mitch, in my opinion, again. So I think the Nagy hire in and of itself was a bad decision by Pace because it wasn't the great fit of coach and quarterback. So there's so many things that go into this, but, the formula was just never right from the start. And unfortunately, it played out over the past few years.
The way you described it actually is great because I feel like Bears fans don't understand that kind of where it was set up to fail from the beginning, right? You wanted to get a coach in there that believed in let's say if Nagy drafted Mitch, it would have been completely different,
Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up on that because I know a lot of Bears fans have already sent me this scenario. When Mitchell Trubisky goes to another team, and let's say he does, and I'm not saying he will, let's say he does have a Ryan Tannehill-like turnaround, should Bears fans feel bad that that never happened here in Chicago?
I could understand why they would feel bad because it would be validation that he actually can play football at a high level in this league. But at the end of the day, they would feel free at that point to, shower all of the blame on Ryan Pace for not building around his quarterback properly. He didn't, find a good enough pieces. Allen Robinson was great, but not a great offensive line. Other weapons were kind of meh. And then he found the wrong head coach for him. So you have to put all that on Ryan Pace for not realizing this is the quarterback you drafted and not understanding the proper system to put around him. So it will be up to Mitch to find that proper system wherever he ends up landing. And if he ends up getting that Tannehill opportunity and turnaround, well, then good for him. You got to feel good for him because he's done everything he can to have success in Chicago. He's put in all the work. He's said all the right things. He's played his butt off. It just hasn't worked.
Yeah. And by the way, if he does have this Ryan Tannehill-like turnaround, then that just tells me Mitch is, in a way, a system quarterback, which nothing is wrong with that, but you're not a Deshaun Watson. You're not a Patrick Mahomes where even if I give you a bad O-line, a bad coach, a bad receiving core, you can still make it work. So you need everything more of like a Jared Goff than a Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, it basically validates he shouldn't have gone number 2 overall.
Exactly. Okay. So just sticking with the quarterback situation. So now that we've kind of, been in agreement that Mitch's career in Chicago is most probably over, what's your kind of overall prediction for what the Bears will do at quarterback this year? Let me just set the table before you do answer. So we've got free agency. Dak Prescott's the biggest name out there. Then we've got a bunch of underwhelming options, maybe a Ryan Fitzpatrick, maybe a Tyrod Taylor. Then we've got trade. Elephant in the room, obviously we know Deshaun Watson wants out. Bears fans are very excited about that. Let me know if they should be. We've got Derek Carr. Maybe he's a trade option. Matt Ryan, Matt Stafford. And then we, of course, have the draft. My one reservation about the draft, by the way, Eric, is if this is indeed Ryan Pace's last year, I don't see how a rookie quarterback, no matter who it is, and it's not going to be Trevor Lawrence, but no matter who it is, comes in and gets the Bears to where Ryan Pace needs them to go. So for me, my 2 cents, I say it's more towards trade and free agency. What say you?
I'm 100% in agreement. I think they're going to look for a veteran of some kind. Excuse me. And I think they're going to try and aim high. Watson is obviously the big fish in this entire thing. My problem with that is, while I'm sure they'll be interested, because how can you not be?
Right.
I don't think they'll be able to put together a good enough package to get him, because I think other teams will be able to offer more, not just in terms of compensation, but in terms of fit, in terms of the right, system and all that stuff. You have to remember, Deshaun sort of controls where he's going to go because he has a no trade clause in his contract.
Yep.
So the Texans will have to present him a trade package that's being offered, and then he's going to be able to pick, okay, I'll do it for this, and then he'll waive the clause and they'll go through with the trade. So the Bears would have to make one hell of a sales pitch in order to get Deshaun Watson. We'll just leave it at that. But I personally think their top target is going to be Prescott because he's going to be a free agent, or at least he's projected to be a free agent.
Right.
My guess is they'd prefer to sign somebody without having to give up draft picks. Because then, yes, you're giving up a ton of cash, but at the same time, you keep all your picks and you can use them to build around that quarterback and have an even better chance of making that, run to the playoffs and hopefully deep into the playoffs. So I think Prescott's going to be their primary target, unless, of course, Dallas ends up franchise tagging him again, which is highly possible if they can't work out a long-term deal. So I think Prescott and Watson are probably pipe dreams and out of the picture. The one name I keep coming back to is Matt Ryan. I think in terms of fitting into Nagy's system, he's probably the best you can hope for because he's cerebral, very smart, can work from the pocket. He learns systems quickly. He's proven that before. I think he'd be a great fit. And I don't think the compensation would be too outlandish because he's going to be 36 this year. So he's, getting on the older side. And that contract's going to be tough to trade. So, the Bears are going to have to work around the money issue if they were to go after him. I don't know if Atlanta's ultimately going to trade him or not because that's going to be difficult for them. But he's the name I come back to. I think the one that actually that it is sort of the perfect world scenario for Pace would be Derek Carr.
Yeah.
Because his contract isn't nearly as expensive as Stafford, Watson, Ryan. It's much more manageable. He's only 30. He's coming off the best season of his career. He's got 2 years left on his contract. He's got the big arm that can work well in Chicago. He's relatively mobile. He has all the things you could ask for. The question, of course, is will the Raiders make him available? Because if they do, I believe wholeheartedly he's the one that Pace would, go hard at because he would definitely be an upgrade over Trubisky, and I think he'd be a halfway decent fit for this offense.
Okay. So do you have, again, we're very early in the offseason, but do you have kind of your, shot in the dark of prediction of kind of what ends up happening with the quarterback position? Because there's a lot of Bears fans that think, we're probably going to end up with the doomsday scenario of a Ryan Fitzpatrick. And I just need you to tell them that's very possible, or I actually do see, and you might not even have to say the name, but I actually do see there being an upgrade here at the quarterback position just because of how desperate Ryan Pace might get.
It's true. I mean, he's in survival mode, so I expect him to be, very aggressive. He's proven in the past he'll do whatever it takes to get a quarterback if he has to. I mean, he traded up one spot for Mitch and gave up 3 extra picks. We all know this. So, if he feels he's got even an inkling of a shot at somebody worthwhile, he'll mortgage the future all over again if he has to. I believe that 100%. So, Fitzpatrick, yes, he is a possibility. He's 39 years old. He's not, elite or anything like that, but he's a solid quarterback, especially when you give him some options, some decent receivers, some decent protection. He's been able to have some good runs. I mean, what he did in Miami was very impressive to me, considering what he was surrounded by. Obviously, he's not the ideal scenario. He's sort of the fallback option. You also have to keep Jimmy Garoppolo in mind here. There's a very good chance that San Francisco could move on from him. They might be in the Watson scenario very much so because they've got the setup that he would be looking for, and they can probably put a trade package together, in which case they might end up cutting Garoppolo without even trading him because that contract's difficult to trade, given his recent history. So if they cut him, the Bears would actually be able to get him for a decent price and still be able to keep all their picks. So while that's not the ideal scenario, I think it would be a halfway decent one if you have to settle for a sort of middle ground.
Okay. I agree with that. That's a good one. Jimmy Garoppolo is a name nobody's talked about either. So thank you, Eric, for bringing that up. So I think what Bears fans need to understand is there are a lot more options than just Deshaun Watson, even though he is the big, sexy name out there. So there's plenty of quarterbacks. And Ryan Pace isn't getting any sleep, I'm sure, this summer because he's going to be trying to figure out what it takes to get one. So, all right, Eric, let's close it out here with the last question. So with the Bears keeping Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, it's clear that we did not go in a rebuild direction. Now, whether or not that should have been the case, I'll obviously let you talk about this, but you kind of alluded to it. This team is closer to the top than the bottom, but is it really? Does this team need a full rebuild, or does this team need a full retool? And let me just add to that, we don't have a quarterback. We don't have an offensive line. But if Allen Robinson comes back, receiving core is okay. We just drafted a tight end, signed one. Defense is aging, but still solid. Special teams looks like we found a kicker. So I see a lot less holes than I guess before in prior years. Obviously, the one big hole is at the most important position. But is this team in need of a full rebuild, or can we just do a retool and get back to contention?
I think this team is way better off than where it was back in 2015. First of all, I mean, yes, the rosters were similar in terms of being towards the oldest in the league, but this time around, the Bears have a lot of young pieces scattered around the roster that have tons of potential. You think about Roquan Smith. He's 23 years old, playing at an all-pro level. He can be a fixture for your defense. Bilal Nichols, Eddie Jackson's only 27. Eddie Goldman's going to be back. He's only 27. So they've got some young pieces to work with on defense. Jalen Johnson, the rookie, he played outstanding. He's only 21, so that's another one. Offensively, Darnell Mooney looked great. Cole Kmet looks like he's going to be a pretty solid player. Cody Whitehair, once he moved out to guard, played a lot better. James Daniels was playing great before he unfortunately got hurt. Sam Mustipher looks like he could be something at center. So David Montgomery, he's only 23. So they have a lot more young pieces this time around than they did, 6 years ago in 2015 when Ryan Pace arrived. So that's a big reason why I think retooling is much more doable than just a full rebuild, especially if they can get a quarterback.
Right.
That's where everything funnels back to. It always comes back to the quarterback. If they can find one, even above average, it doesn't even need to be elite, an above average quarterback who can play solid from year to year, they can be competitive over a long-term period of time. The question is, can they find one?
Magic question. Absolutely. I totally agree there. So I guess, we'll kind of leave it at that. But I think, Eric, actually one last thing I'll ask you too is, you mentioned the young pieces. I think there is still things to be optimistic about. The Bears fans, they're very down right now. Do you have anything positive you can tell them to kind of feel better about the upcoming season, to kind of, let them know that there is still hope out there?
Listen, we don't know how the offseason is going to go, okay? For all we know, there's going to be unexpected movements at the quarterback position. I mean, there's always projections as to what's probably going to happen, but every offseason something unexpected happens, and you have to imagine that the Bears are going to be very aggressive whatever ends up happening. So don't count them out just yet in terms of finding that quarterback option, because weird things always happen in the NFL. We've seen it. There's still a solid defense, especially when they're healthy. They weren't always healthy this year, but they still played pretty decent. So as long as you have that, the running game's starting to come around, especially with the way the offensive line played and David Montgomery played. So if they can somehow retain Allen Robinson, find a halfway decent quarterback, and the defense, has one more good year, I absolutely think they can get to those double-digit wins and back to the playoffs.
Yeah, no, I agree with there. And folks, 2018 wasn't that long ago. We went 12-4. So thank you for that, Eric. Really appreciate that. So, folks, again, make sure you are following Eric on all his social media, and you can find all his work. Again, one of the best follows for Bears coverage. Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I hope this won't be the last time.
Amen, man. Anytime.
Yep, absolutely. So that is all, folks, and we will talk to you guys later.